Rhonda told you that?
Yeah, I said, I need an agenda for the meeting, and she said, no, there isn't.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, there was.
Maybe she was just not, maybe I didn't, wasn't clear. or
Yes, there
something.
was.
Okay.
And
we can. All right.
Is there a paper agenda?
We'll go ahead
I haven't
and
been
call
out there yet
our
today. I'm gonna
meeting
Okay, was there nothing out?
order.
Danielle McKenzie,
Here.
Jason Blair,
Call the roll.
Melissa Hunt,
Here.
Louis Williams,
Here.
Adam Webb,
Here.
Mark
I
Ham,
think that it's still
Here.
wet enough that.
Glenn Lewis.
Trying to cut down.
Do I need to read this since we're not doing that? Randy, I should have asked. Should I still make that announcement?
Quite a bit. We can waive the video conference reading, can't we, since we're not doing it, so.
We have nobody appearing by video.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right, item 2 would be discuss,
Oh, wait.
oh,
Okay.
okay.
Now you gotta read it.
Okay. Okay, well then, this meeting shall be conducted pursuant to 25 Oklahoma Statute 307. An announcement will be made at the beginning of the meeting that if the connection is lost, the city will attempt to restore communications for a maximum of 30 minutes. If we're unable to do that, then the meeting will reconvene at a certain date, time, and place. All right, and we've had our roll call, and item 2 would be discussion regarding proposed adoption of a stormwater management criteria update manual as the drainage regulations for the city of Moore.
Okay, we're having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
David's
he
getting
not-
our engineer up on Zoom, and I should have a short presentation today. Looks like David is figuring this out.
Okay, well, we can
I
wait
apologize.
a moment, that's all right.
It's not a big deal. This is what our work conference calls start to. Hey, do we have this person online or all the technical stuff?
We could talk about the weather.
Yeah. Quiet in here.
There we go.
Okay. And then, David, if you could bring up my PowerPoint, that would be great. I feel so,
Yeah.
like, not in control.
I'll have to do it as a share screen.
The PowerPoint is not showing up. I think you need to share the screen, then pick the PowerPoint.
Because otherwise he'll hide her again. Yeah, you never, like, you try to find that
Oh,
level. And I never want my double chin shown, so I'm trying to.
That's why I put mine on up high.
Then I was like, oh, today's a bad hair day.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
That works.
All right. Now I'm in control.
All right.
Very short presentation because I want to make sure that we have enough time to get everybody's questions answered and have some great discussion. So our current regulations were adopted in 2002. There have been really no significant updates since that time. The top complaint received by the city is drainage, maybe after streets. It's a toss-up. But the drainage complaints are large and small. includes new construction and old construction. And the drainage criteria that we're proposing today will have an impact on floodplain in future map updates. We do have the more master drainage plan that mapped out the floodplain for us using certain modeling, which in some cases increased the floodplain, in other places it decreased it. Those will eventually be turned into FEMA at the next map update that they do for our community. And so it would be nice if we had a drainage criteria that used the same modeling process, so we can make sure that everything matches and the floodplains can be accurately accounted for. And as you can see with these drainage problems, the burden of fixing these problems fall on either the city and the taxpayers or on private property owners. And we have one example that I keep using because it's really probably our most well-documented example. And it's this one here on the top. You can't really see this pointer on the screen, but it's on your top left. That is the Southmore High School that has a detention pond. In the 2015 rains, the pond overflowed, and with some other storm sewer issues, it flooded about 4 or 5 people's homes. They had about 2 feet of water is what I recollect in their homes. And fixing the problem is going to take, our estimate is $700,000. So, that's a big part of the city's budget to take. We're looking for grant funds, but that's the reason why we're having this discussion, is because the problems do come with a price tag, and we just need to discuss on who that should fall to.
Elizabeth, are you talking about $700,000 to fix that one instance of this flooding problem?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make
Yes.
sure I understand.
The drainage criteria update process began in June 2019. The committee has met 6 times, a couple times via email, but 6 times in person. The proposed criteria is much more comprehensive than our current regulations, and they look at the whole of drainage, everything from subdivision development to lot development to maintenance. So the whole lifespan, if you will, of drainage. Emphasis is placed on stormwater quality benefits to satisfy the Lake Thunderbird TMDL. That's always in the back of our minds. But the plan does introduce some flexibility, and we would hope that in future updates we could increase this flexibility. We think it's important to allow developers to maybe pick and choose certain things to meet their requirements and what they would like to see. But some of the flexible things that we've included in this criteria update, we do allow for parking lot detention, which is really important for small commercial projects who may not have the land for an actual detention pond. And we do encourage more BMPs or best management practices in new developments by reducing some creek buffering requirements if they include some stormwater quality improvement methods. So the main areas of compromise, we looked at this after council made it clear that we should compromise with the development community where possible. So compromise was made in a lot of different areas. We compromised on size of easements for detention ponds. We went down about 5 feet. I believe it was from 20 feet to 15 feet. We compromised whether builders should be responsible for showing drainage on their lots whenever they submitted building permit applications. And we determined that the city staff would take responsibility for that and look at the development plans to make sure that the lot drainage was going to work. We compromised when using current urbanization levels for assuming the stormwater runoff. And I think that's one of the issues that we'll talk about more today. And allowing HydroCAD which is a program that is used for the calculations and modeling. This was important to the engineering community because this is what they had experience in. So this is one of the areas where we allowed that to happen. And allowing rational method for smaller drainage areas. And this is another discussion point that I'm sure we'll have this afternoon. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to our consultant, Janet Mishek, with Mishek and Associates. And she just has a few slides that kind of show the difference between the different calculation methods that we're talking about. And I believe that Kyle Miller is her, is another engineer. He's driving in from Tulsa, so he may have gotten delayed somewhere in the metro, but I'm sure he will be here momentarily. But Janet, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Okay. Thank you for letting me point out the things that we feel like we've either compromised on or those that we can't. So I'm showing you one of the ugliest slides I think I've ever prepared. This is a copy of a table from a development that we reviewed in-house for the city of Owasso. We have a similar contract with other cities to do subdivision review. You can see the hydrologic parameters using the SCS method. The company that did this, Tulsa Engineering and Planning, and Kyle has all the backup information with him when he gets there. They actually did a rational method calculation for each of these sub areas, as well as the hydrograph method. And you can see that for a 5-year storm, this drainage area A had a 5-year flow rate of 68.8 versus 28.9 in the rational method, and 129.4 versus 58.7. So if we're going to, I might just mention that the SES unit hydrograph method is an industry standard. Using a 24-hour storm is an industry standard, and this is how we modeled all of the drainage basins within the city of Moore for the master drainage plan. When we did that, we were lucky enough, although the citizens were unlucky enough, to have the big storm of 2015. And we were able to get high water marks and measure rainfall amounts. And we calibrated our models to that and came up with a very good tolerance. So we feel like using the SCS method, even though the flow rates are considerably higher than the rational method, is what is more in touch with reality, basically, since that is what happens. But this is I think on the next slide, Now, have I been muted this whole time I've been talking to you?
No, just
No, we
for a
can
few
hear you.
seconds.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Just a few
Would you mind
seconds.
going ahead and going to the next slide? In this same subdivision,
I can't.
they, of course, had smaller drainage basins.
Ma'am, we
for-
can't see this at all, so you'll just have to tell us the importance.
Yeah, it's too small.
It's
It's
just
way
real
too small.
Well, I guess my point, Kyle will be there with this table, but the importance is that they computed rational method flow rates and unit hydrograph flow rates. And in most cases, the rational method computes a flow rate anywhere from 40 to 60% of the SCS method. So the flow rates are just too small. You know, all over town, we have stormwater infrastructure that's just too small, and people develop and try to put water into that, and it's just too small. So this being the industry standard, the reason I brought this was because this area O has a flow rate of 227.5 compared to 92.5 for the rational method, and they wanted to use the 92.5 to, it's a flow rate in cubic feet per second, to size a pipe under an arterial road. And that's just not something that I think anyone would allow. So that just points out, we run into this all the time, this difference in rational method and SCS. I guess it automatically mutes me every time you, you do that. The modified rational method is a hydrograph method that is not the industry standard. It's one where you compute a storm that's only as long as the time of concentration of the watershed. The time of concentration of the watershed is just the amount of time it takes water from every point in the watershed to reach the point where you're measuring the flow. So we are involved in many communities in the community rating system, which is an ISO type rating, kind of like the fire rating. You know, ISO does that so that you can get insurance ratings and people pay, you know, they pay lower premiums if they have a better fire system. Well, it's the same with the stormwater system. The community rating system comes in and takes a look at your stormwater program and gives you a rating from 10 down to 1, with 1 being the best. And in their addendum that just came out, they actually deduct points. Every 500 points you get, you know, you get to drop to the next level and you get a 5% decrease in flood insurance policies. They actually deduct points for allowing the use of the modified rational method. The HydroCAD website, you know, Elizabeth mentioned that we said, okay, you can go ahead and use HydroCAD software as long as it's an SCS unit hydrograph, they also do rational method in that, but their own website, this is verbiage from their website that says, since a hydrograph produced by the rational method does not reflect the total runoff or intensity variations of a real storm, it is not recommended for the design and analysis of detention ponds. So, you know, that's pretty telling right there. And then from the ODOT roadway drainage manual, November 2018, they have a section on stormwater detention where they say the use of the hypothetical rainfall distribution hydrograph, the SCS simplified hydrograph, and the modified rational method triangular hydrograph are not accepted. So it's clear that modified rational method, which I believe was probably the design that in the high school detention pond that flooded people in that neighborhood, it is only designed for a storm length that's equal to the time of concentration of the watershed. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on, but it causes a smaller detention pond that's easily filled and can overflow. One of the things that Elizabeth talked about was fully urbanized discharges versus freeboard. Cities of Norman, Midwest City, and Enmid all require the use of fully urbanized discharge with a foot of freeboard. We eliminated the fully urbanized design requirement because the developers, engineers requested that, but instead we raised the freeboard requirement to 2 feet from 1 foot. And I've listed the reasons down here, but we have new subdivisions, had residential buildings that flooded in 2015, and that's a storm that's smaller than 100-year. It was anywhere from a 50 to a 25-year to a 10-year, depending where you are in the city. But they should have had a foot of freeboard above the urbanization, and they didn't. Obviously, they flooded, so they were already eating into what we consider a 2-foot freeboard requirement if we had that in place at that time. There was an elementary school design using existing flow rates and 1 foot of freeboard that flooded during this storm that was smaller than a 100-year storm. So we cannot continue to do this without either going to fully urbanized discharges or adding a foot of freeboard. Adding the freeboard, or an additional foot, the foot of freeboard is an easier calculation for the design engineers than the fully urbanized discharges. And so that's why we relinquished on the full urbanization, but added the freeboard requirement. Okay, next slide. We also had some discussions with the developers on overland flow lane. We use the National Engineering Handbook prepared by the Natural Resources Conservation Commission, National NRCS, what is it, Kyle? National SCS is Soil Conservation Service. So this is now the National Resource Conservation Service. I always get those mixed up. But we use a velocity method where the time of concentration, which again is that longest amount of time for every part of the watershed to contribute to the point you're looking at is equal to a number of segments. And for a while, the water is sheet flow, then it's shallow concentrated flow, and then it's open channel flow. So next slide. On the overland flow length, we had recommended a more conservative method of computing it, which produced shorter times of concentration, which produced higher peak flows, and there was much complaint about that. So we've gone back to saying, okay, we'll go back to exactly the method that the National Engineering Handbook says for overland flow. Use this equation, these n values, and then use this less conservative method, but it's the published method by the NRCS, and I think it's appropriate for these smaller watersheds. Trying to go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. On that overland flow length, there, in the updated version of the National Engineering Handbook, they have indicated that and we've required the maximum flow length to be 100 feet, but they felt like it should be limited based on the slope of the land and the N value. And it's all laid out in equation 15.9 of the National Engineering Handbook for time of concentration. And so we've changed the criteria to say, okay, we're going to follow this method exactly, and you can use the equation shown in the previous slide for computing overland flow. Probably a lot more technicality than you want, but we were criticized for being too conservative in the overland flow length calculation for the time. And so we've said we will follow the manual or follow the National Engineering Handbook methods so that it's, you know, it's completely backed up by the handbook itself. After the 100 feet or so that you calculate, the water becomes shallow concentrated flow, and there's several different types. This is also from the national same publication, National Engineering Handbook, time of concentration. And you can use this until the water becomes an open channel or something, you know, like that. This computes velocity, so you can easily compute time. So in response to the developer engineer's request, sheet flow will strictly follow part 630-1502 methods for estimating time of concentration. And this is less conservative than what we had originally proposed. So kind of in conclusion, and Kyle, I've asked Kyle to talk more about one of the reasons the modified rational method has fallen from grace, basically, is that it's based on rainfall, a smaller amount of rainfall. The industry standard now is to use a 24-hour storm that starts out very low intensity, and in the middle of the rainstorm, you have high intensity rainfall. And the rational method, modified rational method, only uses a portion of that rainfall. So I can explain that more if you'd like, if you'd let me share my screen. I don't know how technical you want to get on that, but it's what Norman uses, it's what Edmond uses. You know, many other communities, Ponca City, you know, Tulsa, whatever, it's Waso, it is an industry standard, and it allows for a detention pond that if you have a day where it rains all day and you're going to have a 100-year storm, over the course of the day, you might have 9 inches of rainfall, but the 5 or 6 inches of that is going to fall in a 3-hour period in the middle of it. So the problem with not allowing for that other rainfall is that it can fill up your detention pond, so there's not as much volume when the really critical part of the storm occurs. And so it's an industry standard as well, but Kyle can kind of go over that with you as well.
Jana, I have a question. I have a
Yes.
question. So I don't think I need any more technical information. That's for sure.
I've got
I
plenty if you
appreciate
want
it. No,
I could talk about this all day.
I was trying to pull out my calculus from college, but it's been a little bit. So, so the information that you gave us based off the handbook, which is the industry standard, I saw that there was one citation from 2010. So we're talking about information that's been around for a while. Is that correct?
It's actually been around much longer than that. It was
I-
updated in
I figured
2010.
it was, but so we're still talking about this update was 11 years ago, and more, we're very aware that I know it may be a 100-year flood, but we get severe weather from time to time. So I think that we're all on this panel aware of that. So I just wanted to verify that, yeah, this information's been around for a while. Okay, perfect.
Right. Yeah, there are, if you go to the internet, you can just look up NRCS, National Engineering Handbook, and it comes up and you can pull out different chapters and look at them, but they've all been updated within the last 10 to 15 years.
Okay.
But they are certainly 50 or 60 years old from the beginning when they started. So anyway, and even the overland flow length, time of concentration stuff, that was based on research they did in the 90s, and it caused them to put that to update the 2010 model to limit the overland flow length to something based on slow, anyway, stuff we're not going to do a pop quiz after that. So if you're not taking notes, don't worry about it. But there's a lot of technical stuff behind this. But I think the biggest thing that we need to know that is if we continue to allow the use of the modified rational method to compute detention ponds, they're going to be too small. They won't fill up, or they will fill up and overflow. And you saw that, you saw that in the 2015 storm. We have houses all over town that were in a new subdivisions that flooded. So using those existing flow rates that they were supposedly based on and allowing a foot of freeboard, it wasn't enough because water got into the houses anyway. So what we're trying to do is set this up so that we can prevent flooding problems, because allowing this to continue, allowing properties to continue to flood is just going to place this burden on the city. And the city is now having to try and go out and get a grant to fix the problem with the high school detention pond. And there's other places in town that have this as well. If we can prevent those problems in the beginning, we're going to be so much better off. Right now, those people they didn't know that they were in the floodplain, so they probably didn't have flood insurance. I've noticed from comments that a lot of them have gone out and bought it, but you don't have a way to protect yourself as a landowner unless you buy flood insurance, and you've got to know about that to begin with. So that's another reason in the community rating system. This is something with good criteria that the city could enter, and they could have ISO come in and rate them. And lower flood insurance premiums for those people that need to buy flood insurance. Flood insurance is good for anyone because there's a lot of people, obviously, that flood that aren't in the special flood hazard area that the NFIP produces. They flood from overland flow coming in. They flood from, you've got several areas that flood, and a lot of them are issues with development. And that's the only thing you can do to protect yourself is buy flood insurance. So the community rating system is a good system. It's been around for a lot of years, and all the city probably would have to do is pull in, look at the points that they can get now, and they could probably enter as maybe a 9 or even an 8 would give them a 10% for those people that truly are in the special flood hazard area, but give at least 5% for those people that want to buy flood insurance that aren't even in a floodplain. And in that case, that's something we would truly recommend, because those people who flood because of poor development practices, I'll put it, they can buy flood insurance now at a very good rate because they're not in a rated zone. They're not in a floodplain. So you can spend $300 or $400 a year and protect yourself, but that's pretty much the only mitigation measure that a homeowner has, unless they want to go to the expense of flood-proofing their home. And they shouldn't have to do that. The development should be constructed flood-safe. So, listen to, I'm on my soapbox, I know, but I just want to say that we've looked at all this. We calibrated models to the May 2015 storm. We know water. And we know that ISO sets, if you follow CRS standards, you have a good stormwater program. So if CRS tells you not to allow, or they're going to deduct points for allowing the use of the modified rational formula for stormwater detention, then that says a lot to me because I'm pretty heavily involved in CRS in a lot of communities. You know, we've modernized the standards to reduce flood risk, and we've compared them. We've compared them to Edmond, to Norman, to you know, to other communities around, and we're not requiring or requesting that the city approve methods that are onerous because they're applied in other communities.
Thank you, Janet. I appreciate, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm finished. I'll just keep babbling if you let me.
Okay. No, I was just going to thank you. I appreciate the technicalities. It's not something I'm really extremely knowledgeable about, so I found that very useful. Thank you for presenting all that to us.
Oh, you're welcome.
And are you Kyle? Did you have anything that you needed to present or say, or?
Kyle brought all of the backup information for all of this, and I apologize for not being able to
Okay.
to be able to come tonight. I just had another engagement tonight. But Kyle can show you the report that I hand wrote all my stuff in.
I don't think I
He's
need
not-
to see that. I appreciate it though, Janet, but I think we're good. So Elizabeth,
Okay.
is there a proposal for this is the proposed and this is how much it's gonna cost? I mean, what's the next steps of this? Because the technical part, I am so lost on this and everybody's eyes are glazing over a little bit.
Well, of course, we have the proposed criteria that we've published. We have, you know, held a developers, engineers meeting. I think we sent out around 50 notices. We had maybe like 10 in attendance, but most of them didn't speak. We had a few speak on behalf of Mr. Hayworth and Crafton Toll. I believe that Ross Morris was there and spoke. And they have some concerns. I think that's why we're here today, is to try to talk some of those out. But really, the council would need to decide at whatever city council date this is shown at, if they would like to adopt it or not. If they adopt it, then it would go into effect after 30 days, and it would apply to all, of course, new developments that come in. For those that are already outstanding or have started, we would apply it at the final plat stage as much as we could. I mean, there might be some things that we might have to work with some developers on for a transition period, but basically it would start at the final plat
So we
stage.
wouldn't burden someone midway construction on the house with this, correct?
Oh, absolutely not, no.
Okay, so this would be, we've approved, you know, over 1,000 homes, I don't know what the number is, since January. It would apply to all those between, in that area of development on east and more, yeah.
Right, so if approved, then it would only go into effect for those homes that were permitted after, like July-ish, you know, assuming it was approved in June, and then final plats that came in. And again, like we're here to work with developers if there's something with their final plat, you know, that just doesn't fit with this, that they started work on. I mean, we're here to work with them on those specific situations.
And Mr. Hayworth, you're here. Is there anything that you
Yes, what?
would like to address or concerns? What? Yes. Yeah, well, come on up if you don't mind and just share with us. And just for the record, your name and address.
Marvin Hayworth, and I live at 2800 Shady Creek Lane in Moore.
Thank you.
I'm a home builder and a developer in Moore. I've been working in Moore since 1960, so I've been here a long time. I have concerns with this. I served on the committee that prepared the ordinances for our high wind construction of new homes, and we decided to go with 135 mile an hour wind, or an F3 instead of an F5. I feel like in this situation, we're shooting for the F5 in this flood ordinance, that we're going overboard. I have looked at the flood study that Meshach and Company prepared, and I will disagree with Janet on the fact that a lot of this flooding was in new construction areas. I have looked at it several times. Most of it is in the older areas, and I looked at the cost, that it's going to cost more to fix all those older areas. It's going to take more 20 years to pay for that. I mean, I don't know how many of you have looked at that flood study, but it's a lot of money to fix it. This ordinance is really not going to fix any of those problems. You're still going to get the complaints every time it rains. The storm that we studied happened in 2015. I was flooded in 2015. I'm still not in favor of this ordinance because that storm, there's a gentleman named Gene Sider that lives at 34th and Sunny Lane. He has lived there his entire life, and he's 80 years old. He said he has never seen that much water come through that valley since 1949. So we're trying to fix a problem that only happens every 70 years, in my opinion. The school site, the Timber Creek school site, Mr. Shawn and Silver Star Engineering built that site 2 foot above the 100-year floodplain. And I know this is not scientific, but the water was within 1 foot of the top of that school site. So that indicates to me that it was more than a 100-year floodplain, because that site was built 2 foot above it, and the water was 1 foot above the 100-year floodplain on that school site. And so I feel like that we're trying to fix a problem that doesn't happen that often, and I don't think that this ordinance is going to fix all of the old problems that you have with old subdivisions. If you look at the flood study that was done, and you go through it, and Elizabeth was kind enough to give me a complete copy, and it's this thick, and I know it's a lot to go through, but I went through it, and the problems are mostly in the older areas of town. If you look at the subdivisions that have been done in the last few years, they're not causing the flood problems. We are engineering, and we're using the modified rationale method, which Janet talks about, and she does not like, but I still think it's a good method. We used it in Blue Stem, and Blue Stem did not flood. The one across the street at the high school did flood, and that's a big problem, the high school flooding. But if I'm not mistaken, there was a subdivision put into Oklahoma City called Stone Meadows that provided no detention because their water was coming into Moore. So there is no detention in that subdivision that I know of. And that discussion was had 20 years ago when that subdivision was put in, that it was going to be a problem for Moore because they didn't provide any detention. So that's part of the problem at the South Moore High School. We did the Blue Stem addition, and our piping in there is large enough that it's going to make it possible for you to fix that problem. It's going to cost a lot of money, but you're going to dump it into the piping that I installed because we installed it large enough to handle this. And so in summary, I feel like that we're trying to fix a problem. As I said, it's the F5, F3 tornado. We're shooting for the F5 in this flood study. It's going to cause a lot of the small parcels of land in the city of Moore to not be ever developed, because you can't develop those little pieces when you have to develop and put the kind of detention, storm pipes, and everything you have to do. It's going to make it to where it just can't be done. So it's going to force the home building community to leave Moore, and that's not, I'm not trying to make a threat. I'm just saying that that's what will will happen because we can't develop these little pieces. You'll still have the big tract developers who can buy 160 acres and develop it, but you won't have the little small businesses such as myself. I mean, and I've done 160 acres before, but I can't afford to buy one anymore. Land cost has gone crazy, so you can't buy that. But
What is it, what do you, what's your definition of a small development?
my definition is anything under 40 acres.
And we've got it set at 20. So in all of this study, what we've considered to be small is 20 acres or less. There is a larger impact on the smaller development pieces of land. That's just a byproduct of how this all shook out, so.
Marvin, give me an example of what's 40 acres that you developed recently here in Moore, or that someone's developed recently, just so I can picture something.
I developed the Cider Farms edition
Okay.
across the creek from the elementary school that I spoke of. We did that one with the modified rationale method.
And how many acres is that?
It is 39 acres.
Okay, I know where that is.
And we created no flooding problems from there.
What are, if you don't mind, what are some particulars with the proposed ordinance that you feel are extreme or that you would like to see?
Well, they want to use, it's proposed to use a different method of calculating the floodwater than the modified rationale method. And there are cities around that are still allowing, Oklahoma City allows the use of that modified rationale method. And I know there are cities that do not allow it. But if you guys would take the time to look through the flood study and look at where the flooding occurred and look at the developments that have been created in Moore in, say, the last 20 years that were under the current code, I think you'll see that, looking at that flood study, that it's not the new developments that are creating today's problems. And the storm that we're looking at, that I don't care what the weather people say, that storm created a lot of water, and it was more than a 100-year flood, and especially where I live and at that school, because you can look at the water level. Now, you can use all these calculations that we've heard, and I'm like you, I can't follow those calculations. It's kind of like me talking to a computer guru. It goes right over my head in about 10 seconds. I mean, it starts off, I can understand the first of it, but it goes over my head pretty quick, and this does too. But I know what I've developed. I know what I've watched other people develop under the current rules that we have. And you take Edgewater and look at Edgewater here in Moore. Those are huge detention ponds in that area under the current regulations, and they're big detention ponds, and they're going to hold a lot of water. You know, the problem, and the biggest problem in my area, and Janet will confirm this, is that stream that comes through where I live starts at approximately the First Baptist Church, and maybe even a little north of there. There's very little detention on that creek because everything's been developed around it. And the study shows that there's no place to put any detention on that creek to help with the problem on that creek. There's just, and I even talked to an engineer to see if I could buy the property at 19th and Bryant. It's a little east on the north side. There's an area there that's in the floodplain, to see if we could turn that into a dirt pit and eventually make a detention pond out of it. And that's 60 acres, and it's not big enough to have an impact on this. But back to the ordinance, I just think we're trying to kill an F5 with this ordinance, and it's over the top. I think we need to look at this and tone it down a little bit. I'm not saying we don't need to do it at all. We do need to improve the drainage criteria, making the builders fix their lots to where they drain to the streets instead of on the neighbor. That's a good thing, because we all know we've heard problems with that forever. I hear those problems. I get calls from homeowners in my developments and that I build for, and we're not, as developers, we're not doing a good enough job of that. So that's something that will eliminate some of the complaints. It'll get the water to the street instead of, one of the pictures that was on there was running through people's backyards. I mean, it was flooding down the backyard. And that's the things that we need to cure. And this ordinance is probably good for 160 acre developments. You're going to create a tremendous amount of water. So I just think you're overshooting the mark. And I would urge all of you to get the copy of the flood study and look at where the flooding occurred and see what the problems were, and look at how many of the problems this ordinance is going to fix. I'm open to any questions anyone has.
Well, and I don't disagree with most of what you're saying, Marvin, but we do have new developments that are creating flood problems today that the rational method did not satisfy satisfactorily. The one north and east of 27th and Eastern, we've got flooding issues today because of that neighborhood, and
North
it's less
and-
than 5 years old. What's the name of that neighborhood?
Waters.
Waters, yeah. Waters has given us fits already. It's flooding people downstream, and that's just not acceptable, so we have to do something to fix that. And so I'm not disagreeing with you that maybe there's other adjustments that can be made, but to just simply say that the rational method is acceptable in all cases is not satisfactory to me. So.
Okay.
I agree with that. I would be interested, when, I think Jason asked you what other issues you have with the plan. And I understand that you don't like the method that's being proposed, but things like, instead of 20 acres, maybe it makes sense that it's 40 acres. Those types of details that I think are more negotiable, I would be interested in hearing.
Well, and that's one of,
Not necessarily today, but if you came back to the city with those, because to blanket say that I don't like the method that you're using, that it doesn't give us a starting point on finding a medium.
okay.
That's all.
Well, and with what Louis is saying, I agree that there can be some problems with some of the new developments. And if a subdivision's causing problems on a regular basis, that's a whole different story than causing a flooding problem during this 2015 storm that we had. The 2015 storm was extreme, and we did this entire flood study right after that, which was probably the best time to do it, because you had people up in arms about the storm. There was people everywhere being flooded. I attended the meetings that were held at the station in regards to the flood study. I've participated in this all the way through, but you know, we were given a concession, the 20 acres. We were given a concession that we could continue to use the rationale method on 20 acres, but we were then backdoored with a freeboard of water in the detention pond of an additional foot. Instead of 1 foot, it went to 2 foot. I don't feel like we were given anything in that scenario. You decreased it in one spot and increased the cost in another spot. You know, homeowners, people want to own homes. They want to live in more. We have a great school system. There's a jillion reasons to want to live in more. It's a great community, and I've been here a long time. I'm going to be here the rest of my life. I like this community. If this passes, I'm going to continue to build. I'm going to continue to do what I can do. I'm just asking you to look at it, or give me and my engineer a little time to, we can come up with more information that you're asking for, and I appreciate you asking for that. But I would truly like for you to look at the flood study and see what you see. See if you see something different than what I saw.
How much time would you guys want to come up with some more information to us?
I will probably defer to Muhammad for that. He's the one that's gonna have to help me
Okay, because
with
we do have a lot of houses in the works, and on the east side of town, I'm sitting here thinking, I don't want to delay a long time, but I appreciate you coming up and sharing your side, and
And I don't wanna delay this a long time either.
Yeah.
I don't wanna make it a long drawn-out process.
It's already been a long, drawn-out
Yeah.
process.
Well, it has, but when you're doing something like this, I think everybody will agree that it does take a long time.
Yeah.
It took us a long time to do the high wind codes for the tornado code.
yeah,
And
go ahead.
So,
and I participated in that committee, and as home builders, we agreed that we needed to do something in the city of Moore. We're not saying we don't want to do anything about the flooding. I mean, I just don't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg, so to speak. I mean, the home building is the industry that has built Moore. And, you don't get all the businesses that you have here in Moore without rooftops. We need more.
What I'm hearing is that we may, and Elizabeth, maybe you can help summarize. We've heard from the engineer, heard from Mr. Hayworth, and maybe if there are any additional things that we could do. I don't know. I haven't been a part of that committee, and I don't know if you would want to come back to the city or to the council with some recommendations.
So I want to speak towards the effort that the MESHAC group has put into this. They have been very diligent to help us understand and to help us rationalize how do we keep this from continuing to happen. That's the problem we're trying to solve. Now, I agree with Marvin. Some of this stuff is in old neighborhoods, and there's nothing that we're gonna do that's gonna solve that until we have to fix it. I get that, but I served on the planning commission for years, and over again, we built new neighborhoods that continued to flood. So that's the one piece of Marvin's statement that I don't agree with at all. We have many new neighborhoods, less than 10 years old, that are flooding our city today. And so this rational method has not taken care of that problem at all. And so it has to be something better than that.
I would only add to that, I didn't sit on this committee. I did sit on planning commission for a number of years, not as long as Louis, but my only thing I would say is when we talk about preparing for an F5, and I get that we didn't do that with the wind standards and we knew they needed to be improved. We have serious weather here all the time. We have the kind of weather where you say, well, that never happens, but it does happen and more. And I just don't want us to discount the fact that we are preparing for the 100-year flood that happened in 2019, for the tornado that happened in 2013, for the one that happened in 99. So we're just constantly talking about very significant and severe weather. So I just wanted to
Well, and
state
the
the obvious on that.
2015 storm was very unique in the fact that it was not just simply a concentrated amount of water in one area. It was, where does that water go after it happens? And that's where all of this other stuff come into play. And so it wasn't that one area wasn't designed properly to handle the water. It's the fact that we didn't take into consideration where that water had to go. And that's what this fully urbanized thing is all about, is not only just dealing with this one area that I'm trying to develop, it's trying to understand what am I gonna do to everything around me. And we can't fix 100% of it, but we gotta be better than we are today.
Right. Now, Marvin, is that one of the issues that you have concerns with that Louis addressed, or are you all fine with that?
I'm gonna let Muhammad speak.
Mohammed Khan with SMC Consulting, 815 West Main, 73106. I appreciate that you letting us talk about a little bit more, and I appreciate patience from city staff and MESHAC for having us part of the team. I'm not gonna go into that detail because Marvin kinda gave you a general overall idea how we were looking at this ordinance. And I always start with a good thing in the ordinance, and we agree with the low-impact development feature of this ordinance. We also appreciated the fact that city is also looking into improving the floodplains, floodways, creeks, and those areas which are really sensitive to the citizens of Moore because it helps with their insurance rate if they develop a property in floodplain. I think there are only few points which we thought that perhaps maybe a different perspective or different point of view from the practicing community of engineers who are working in this area for decades and decades. And that's really point of view we brought to the table to see if we can have some insight in it. Nothing is called industry standard. That's a misterm. Why? Because every city uses different methods to do their different practices. Certain things which are shown here labeled as a industry standard, that is not. Because Oklahoma City uses different methods, Norman uses different methods, Edmond uses different methods, and we cannot cherry pick from each community and pick up most conservative part of their standard and lump it together and make it one standard for one community there. There has been so much discussion about rational method, modified rational method. Just a little bit distinction between that. Rational method is supposed to be used for design of a storm sewer system, channels, culverts, creeks. The system was in place for decades and decades, and then it was modified, improved further also for design of detention pond. And that's where the word modified came into play. So modified detention, modified rational method, whenever somebody uses that term, they're talking about using that method for design of detention pond. And if somebody's saying rational method, they are speaking for like design of the storm system, a drainage conveyance system which carries the flow from point A to point B, not for the storage of the water there. Having that clarified, the modified rational method and SCS method are two different methods, and both have been used by, are currently in use by local communities based on the different areas. I'll give you an example. Oklahoma City uses modified rational method for design of detention pond up to 200 acres. We're not asking for 200 acres. Marvin didn't say about 200 acres. He was only talking about like a 40 acres. And our perspective from our engineering community was it that somewhere between 20 to 40 acre is a good range. The reason is why we're looking at making a distinction between a smaller area and a larger area. Because on a smaller area, you don't experience a 24-hour storm, which is a core element or a storm duration in an NRCS method, or some people say SCS method there. I'll give you an example. You have a 1 or 5 acre of development in one area. You're not going to see a 24-hour storm just stay on one constant point and continuously rain for 24 hours. What you see a 24-hour storm on a very large area where a storm moves from point A, point B, point C, and it takes, during movement, it takes more than few hours or up to 24 hours, which is the worst case scenarios. So that's where we thought that a larger area, like 40 plus acres, yeah, it may be reasonable to use a 24-hour storm duration with the NRCS method. But for a smaller area where it may rain just for an hour, 45 minutes, and the storm will move on to a different spot there, there is no need to have a very large detention pond. Really the difference is between is detention pond design with modified rational method and an NRCS method is the volume of the runoff, what is going to come into the pond over there. There has been numerous publication, and I'll share with the consultant engineer too, where the people who wrote the methods for NRCS method they even say that this method was really meant for using the agriculture field. But over the decades, this method has been now used for a smaller urban area there. Its suitability is for larger areas, not for a smaller area. Here is an example which was conducted as a case study for a 10-acre area. And what they found, that the flows, which is the cubic rate of flow is and cubic feet per second, that was pretty much same. The difference was in the storm duration, that on a smaller area, there was a less storm duration, on a larger area, 24-hour storm. That's really where the volume of flow coming into play. And the other reason of the difference in the flow and the volume was it that is the time of concentration method. So earlier you heard the terminology about time of concentration there. Okay. Now, what we are proposing, use the method which is currently used by your local adjacent neighbors, like Midway City, Norman, Oklahoma City, and ODOT. They're not using the TR55 time of concentration method. They are using the method what we were proposing, because it doesn't make sense for this community to use a method which is not used by a surrounding city. When a water flows in a creek and it crosses the Oklahoma City or more, or it crosses the Del City to Norman, it does not recognize its jurisdiction. So that's why we're saying that the characteristic of the drainage basin needs to be uniform with the surrounding cities. And that's really where we get the example of the time of concentration time of concentration and the NRCS method there. The other thing was it that,
And just kind of wrap up your comments here pretty
sure,
please.
Well, there were a few other points, and we can go into that deep exercise at a later time, but we also had some issues with the frequency method they're using. What is suggested in the ordinance is for the street flow capacities there and the freeboard. None of the cities in this area consider analyzing a 500-year storm there. In the drainage ordinance, in this table 2, it is being proposed to also analyze a 500-year storm. We mentioned that point to the consultant, and the answer we got that it is in line with the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. Well, Oklahoma Water Resources Board is charged, designated to exercise flood retarding structure, large reservoir, not a 2-acre, 3-acre pond. Thank you very much. If you have any question, please let
Thank
me
you
know.
very much.
I have a few more questions for Elizabeth and Janet both.
Yeah.
If you guys, I guess to Janet, I was gonna ask kind of a similar question is, with these other cities that you've mentioned, have you found any issues with perhaps 40-acre lots using one method and then 160-acre using a method, do those well, and produce bigger problems with everybody using a different method? Or have you found that they're kind of symbiotic and work together okay?
I would say that really it doesn't make sense to use a different method on a smaller area because it's applicable down to a very small area. You know, a 24-hour storm, it doesn't fall, you know, using that just allows us to be able to route the entire volume that might fall in a storm where it rains all day. But in that kind of storm, a 100-year, 24-hour storm in Norman, in Moore, produces 9 inches of rainfall. But, you know, it begins, the rainfall pattern we use, it takes 8 hours to get up to an inch of rain, you know, and on the other side to go from an inch back down. So it's the center part of the storm that is the most intense. And you'll find that in a 3-hour storm, for instance, 70% of the rainfall that falls within that 24-hour happens. The center 2 hours, about 60% of the total rainfall. So it's that center part of the rainfall is what the modified rational method uses. So the center, you know, if you have a 40-minute time of concentration, it'll use the center 40 minutes, but it'll only use that bit of rainfall. It doesn't account for maybe a 3 or 4 hour storm that might have fell even on these small basins, you're going to get storms that are 3 or 4 hours long that can fill up a stormwater detention facility, and it won't have time to release all the water before the really intense portion does. No storms happen exactly according to this rainfall pattern that we use because it's a hypothetical rainfall pattern, but we do know that all storms have a very intense portion in the center. But if we don't allow for those less intense rainfall portions of the storm to be accommodated and routed through this detention pond, then we're going to fill them up and overflow them. It happens all the time. I kind of grew up, you know, in the beginnings of, say, the City of Tulsa's stormwater program, which is about to go to a CRS1. It's a very good program. And I can remember as a young engineer going out and finding small detention ponds that had only been designed for just maybe a 40-minute or a 50-minute or a 60-minute storm. But we had a bigger storm and they blew out and, you know, had to be repaired. So it's not fair to say that a small drainage area isn't going to get a 24-hour storm or a 6-hour or a 3-hour, because you're going to get longer storms. They're just not going to be intense the whole time. You deal with peak flow. You look at the peak flow in that time of concentration to size the structures, but you deal with a lot more volume if you have a larger storm. It may not be quite as intense, but that much water still has to be accommodated through the pond. We want the pond to be able to do this and to discharge into areas that can accommodate it and not overtop a spillway that wasn't intended to be used for a 100-year storm or whatever. You know, it all makes sense. If I could just sit down and lecture you for about 6 hours, I could get you to come to understand what I say. But the other thing about the 500-year storm is the Water Resources Board takes very seriously their role in dam safety. And there are very specific rules you have to consider a 500-year storm or whatever it is in order to size a spillway safely, because as soon as someone constructs a house downstream of any dam that the water board wants to take, you know, take jurisdiction over, it becomes a high hazard dam, and it's required to have a certain spillway size. You know, you have to look at an inundation breach area, and if houses fall within that, then you have to treat it as a high hazard dam. So there are reasons for all of those things in there. And you know, I mean, it's the science of the industry, I guess. It's the state of the industry, the way that it is. We have a lot of experience in what doesn't work. And we've seen a lot of things not work in Moore over the past several years that have been very frustrating and expensive for the city. And the city has courageously gone after trying to update this so we don't have those problems in the future. Granted, the new criteria isn't going to fix something that occurred right now. You know, that's already there, it's already in place, houses already flood, but we can prevent this in the future. And those people that flood right now are the ones that bear the cost of fixing that.
Thank you, Jan.
Or the city does in many of these cases. I think the city will have to go in and spend the money to fix problems from inadequate drainage structures. So
Thank you,
it's a
thank you.
different philosophy. I'm not sure it's the same as an F5 versus an F3 on the tornado scale, but Moore's seen a lot of tornadoes, and you all have severe weather. You
And
see,
let me just interrupt you real quick. And Adam, did you have something for
Yeah,
Elizabeth?
I had a question for Elizabeth, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just,
Yeah. No, you're
Yeah.
fine. No, I appreciate that. Thank you
Yes.
very much
you.
for your information. And Elizabeth, so if other cities have done pocketed spaces that use a different method, has that seemed to deter development and leave blank spots within those municipalities? And then has it been such an overburdensome cost to a developer that they've refused to develop those smaller spaces?
I don't think I can answer your question.
Okay.
Because that was not a question I was anticipating, to be
Yeah,
quite
sorry.
honest.
Yeah, it is thrown at you just randomly.
So I can't really answer that question.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
we
fine.
have worked in a lot of communities and developed criteria.
Elizabeth,
for
I think Jason had one more thing. Jason and I just.
Is there any way that we could possibly put together, and I apologize because I know you've spent a lot of time on this and energy, is there any way we could look at maybe some options to this plan? I know we don't vote on it. We're not going to see it till the first meeting in June, but is there anything we can do to,
Of course, I mean, that's certainly the council's decision. So, we can, it's currently tentatively scheduled to go in June, but it doesn't have to go in June. It can go whenever you feel that the criteria is good enough to be adopted.
But we do need to be mindful of construction that's, a lot of construction that's
We're
about to begin.
experiencing a period of very heavy development
Right.
right now. So, I mean, it's something that I wouldn't want to put off forever, but
And I don't think anybody'd be in favor of a moratorium until we resolved it. And so
No, I would not recommend that.
I would just ask, I watched and you were taking notes and listening to the conversation. Maybe if you could just summarize it and what the concerns were brought. And if there are things that we could maybe compromise on, make that recommendation. If there isn't, then I would want to hear that as well. And I'm open to doing what's going to be best for our city as a whole.
absolutely, and I don't want to drag it.
Right.
I mean, that's not
And-
the purpose at all.
And I would be interested in hearing, what some proposals are from Mohammed.
Right.
And I think we put a deadline on those. I think that today is the 14th of May. I don't know I would say 2 weeks is a reasonable deadline. I don't know if that makes sense to you. It's a holiday weekend, so maybe it's just the 1st of June and we just bump it a little bit. But I think that we need a hard deadline and we need to put a call out to the development community. If you have a problem with it, I love the idea of, hey, I like the idea of 40 acres, not 20, and this is why. And I think those are very fair suggestions, not that every single thing will be considered, but that we either reevaluate as your working group, because I know you all have more familiarity in this than we do, but or if it's even done on Zoom or something, but then we move forward on deciding what's best for the city and we make that decision.
I agree.
So can we say here the 1st of June, that all suggestions need to be in from the development committee, community from the 1st of
That
June?
seem
I don't know
fair?
if that makes sense. I mean, suggestions.
I like that, Danielle, yeah.
2 weeks I think is reasonable, and nobody's gonna do anything the Friday before Memorial Day, so buy you 3 extra days. So, and then reconvene either as a working group. I mean, I don't know what makes sense. Louis and Melissa, I know, are very attached to this, and they have much more knowledge with Elizabeth.
And am happy with whatever is ultimately recommended. I don't know that I want to.
Agree.
Be part
I
of that.
don't,
You don't want
agree.
You're not volunteering.
Agree. I don't need to know everything about it, but what makes sense.
I think we all, yeah.
Were there a part of that initial group, were there some other developers in our community that were a part of that discussion? Yeah. The 6 meetings that you had?
We had Kendall Dillon, who is the vice president of Crofton Toll. So Crofton Toll, I would say, probably does about 90% of our development plans.
Have
So
you-
they're very familiar, and they have a lot of, they
you-
represented their clients well. They
Okay.
were not, I would say they were not in favor of
Right, I would agree
adopting
with that.
this as proposed.
Okay.
Well, that, I mean.
Yeah, if the council would like to, gather more comments, and I would say suggestions, not comments. I think we've had plenty of comments.
Yeah.
Suggestions are better.
Yeah.
Suggestions are more productive at this point.
Reasonable and measurable.
But that's up to the council, how you'd like us
I
to proceed.
think that-
And then the plan that, or the study that Marvin referred to, is that something that we can get electronically? Okay, that was, the council could take a look at that and what neighborhoods
Agreed.
were flooded and.
Agreed. Okay.
Well, good. Well, I don't want to continue our meeting on this topic if we don't need to, and if there are any other
Marvin,
questions
thank
from
you,
the
Mohammed.
council.
Nope.
No? Okay.
Thank you all very
Thank you,
much for
Janet,
coming.
thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Appreciate
So
it.
Thank
much.
you.
Mr. Hayworth, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you all.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for taking time. We appreciate it.
Okay, that'll bring us to item number 3, discussion regarding the proposed 2021-2022 fiscal year budget.
Vice Mayor and Council, was able to have individual meetings with all of you, and the only comment that I received back was a concern about the potential $75,000 funding for the RTA, and Steve Eady will make a presentation Monday night at the council meeting, and so that decision can be made later. It doesn't have to be made now or even Monday night, because the budget is scheduled for approval at our June 5th meeting.
Perfect.
So
Thank you.
there's
Okay,
there's
perfect.
still some
Okay.
time. So just to kind of let you know where we are and what proposed changes have been made since I had my meetings with you. Sales tax is projected to be $29,175,000. This is an increase of $1,144,000 and 4% over the current year budget. We will make a final adjustment for Costco when the financing agreement is finalized on May 17th, the council meeting Monday night. Use tax is projected to be $4,260,000. This is an increase of $1,450,000 and a 52% increase over the current year budget. The use tax budget is the actual amount of revenue we have received in fiscal year 21. So, same thing with the sales tax. All we've done is, this is what we received in the first 11 months of the fiscal year, plus what the budgeted amount was for the month of June. And so for the sales tax, obviously there's a historical element to it, and then the use tax is just whatever it was in June of 2020. So we're just on one hand, it's a status quo sales tax budget based on what's happened in this last year. However, it's going to show an increase just because the sales tax and use tax budgets were budgeted lower for the current fiscal year just because of the
COVID.
concern about the pandemic.
Yep.
So it's it can be made to look like it's a real rosy budget, but it's actually not that. 1.4% increase, COLA is still included for non-union employees. As far as personnel changes, like has been discussed before, 6 additional uniformed and 2 civilian positions for the police department, 4 additional firefighters and a training chief, 1 kennel tech for animal control, 2 additional recreation specialists for Parks and Rec. $225,000 has been added to the Public Works capital outlay budget for a pothole truck. I emailed the council about that last week, I believe. $100,000 has been added to the library budget for the design of a new facility. An additional $100,000 will be requested in fiscal year 23. $150,000 has been added to Parks and Rec for additions to the equipment storage facility at Buck Thomas Park. $150,000 was previously budgeted. This will be paid for out of the quarter-cent sales tax. And I had previously emailed the council about this facility and roughly $250,000 to $300,000. And at the time I sent the email, I'd forgotten that we'd already budgeted $150,000 for it. So that's just a quick summary of what's happened since I met with you individually. And again, I believe the last 2 components of this are council direction on the RTA and the Costco financing element. Plug that into the budget. Be happy to answer any questions.
The $100,000 for the library, that's for a study, correct? Not for the actual, or is that for part of the actual design?
My understanding is for the design.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
paid feasibility study
Okay,
themselves.
because 200,000, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Feasibility for that portion.
Right.
And then, yeah,
Okay.
commonly we're responsible for the planning, as other cities do, so.
Because it doesn't seem like it's enough for the design. If it's a.
Well,
truly-
it's
the size of-
It's
it's
200,000.
200,000. Yeah, it's 100,000. They've asked for 100,000 in fiscal year 22, and then another 100,000 in fiscal year 23.
Okay. If they're talking about the budget that they're thinking, I don't know that that's 6 or 8%
Well,
of that.
and I did speak with Chris Manna, the Moore library director, about that yesterday, and expressed some concerns, and so he'll discuss that with his board.
And then I have a question about so the city owns the building. The city builds this facility
Mm-hmm.
for the library, and then the library uses it. Is there anybody from the city that's on the board or on the committee or whatever that is? You are?
No,
Oh,
there's
okay.
always one person, I
Okay.
think, yeah.
Well,
Who is that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure that person's been designated
Okay,
right now.
okay. That was-
However,
that's my concern.
However, well, when we move into the design phase and all this, the city will be represented and have input.
Perfect,
Yes.
thank you.
So we're just not there yet.
Just not there.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
On the library board, the city board does have one designee.
Okay.
And we've talked about, we would like to have more input who that person is.
Okay.
Generally, they present and say, this is who we would like.
Okay.
And we've just given it a thumbs up.
Perfect.
When would we discuss who would be doing that design? Is that something we should toy around with right now or wait till a later date?
Yeah, I guess, so that's probably ultimately also where, you know, it's like, who determines who hires, you know, and is our person appointed by that point and all that, and is there a selection process and what?
Well,
yeah.
I mean,
Probably the cart before the horse, but.
well, I mean, my opinion is, you know, the city works with the library board on that, but ultimately it's the city's decision because we're the ones, the city pays for it and it's the city building, so.
Our taxpayers pay
Yeah,
for it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
I agree.
And just, and again, in conversations, that I had with Chris Manna yesterday, you know, they are fine with whoever we select as far as an architecture firm, and they want to work with us, and they understand that, you know, essentially it's, even though they get to use the building, it's essentially our project.
And please don't take my comments, I'm in favor of a new library, I know they need the space and all that,
Yeah.
I just
No.
make
no.
sure that, yeah, we do what's best for the citizens.
I mean, there's been several conversations, you know, between different parties, and so I'm just trying to kind of wrap it all
Yep,
together,
yep.
so.
Appreciate that. A lot of,
Brooks?
yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Brooks, anything else pertaining to this?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay, the next item would be adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, we had a motion and a second. Would you call the roll?
Danielle McKenzie.
Yes.
Jason Blair.
Yes.
Melissa Hunt.
Yes.
Louis Williams.
Yes.
Adam Webb.
Yes.
Mark Ham.
Yes, we are adjourned. See y'all
Thank
Monday.
you all for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Danielle, see you. Have a good weekend.
She may be back in the office.
Probably. I think I drove